I found my name written in blood under the carpet. As a kid, there was always something creepy about our house. It wasn't the squeaks in the floorboards or the shadows that stretched abnormally long during sunset, but it was the walls. They seemed to breathe, if that made any sense. Sometimes when we would be home alone, my sister and I would hear what sounded like whispers coming from within them. And whenever we told our parents about it, they would just laugh and say that the house was just settling. That did unmake any sense to me, because we lived in a small town where houses do unmove. My parents had built our house themselves after winning it in a poker game. Well, actually, they lost it, but it ended up being a net positive. So they had built the house for over a decade before I was born, piece by piece, slowly turning their dream into a reality. The interior was all wood paneling with these cool stone hinges set into the walls at different heights, and the whole thing was lit with these old-fashioned oil lamps. There was no electricity in the house. But despite how much time my parents spent on this house, it was only meant to be a temporary home. They always told us that they wanted to move to the city and live in a condo after we were grown up. But somehow the years passed, and here we are, still living in the same house. And now that I'm all grown up myself, I can finally see why. It all comes down to one word: asbestos. You see, the government offered to buy our house from us because it was located in an environmentally protected area. But my parents turned it down because it was riddled with asbestos. They said that getting rid of it would cost nearly as much as the house itself was worth. So instead, they decided to wait until we kids were out of school and then do a full renovation once we moved out. Now, I knew that asbestos was bad, but back then I didn't know how bad. I just assumed that it would make my parents sick if they breathed it in too much. So every Saturday morning they would suit up in these Tyvek outfits and respirator masks and go at it. Meanwhile, I would watch from the doorway, waiting for them to finish so I could get in there and start playing. I remember thinking how much fun it would be to own a house just like this when I grew up. Then I would spend hours pretending to be an adult, sitting at the kitchen table, drinking pretend coffee, and signing important documents. But now, I'm not so sure anymore. You see, growing up, my bedroom was next to the one that my parents shared. And as a kid, I used to sneak in there from time to time. After all, they weren't doing anything in there that I wasn't allowed to see. That is until one day when I found something disturbing beneath the carpet. It was my name spelled out in blood. At first I thought it was a joke, some kind of prank that my dad had played to scare me. But then I started paying closer attention. The blood wasn't dried, which meant that it was real and very fresh. But my parents never drew blood in our house. They didn't even cut themselves while making their delicious homemade sausages. So who had written my name in blood? I'll never forget the look of confusion on my face when my mom came in there and saw me staring at the wall. She must have known what I was thinking because she quickly came over and started dragging me out of the room. "Don't talk about this," she said. "You're too young to understand." I tried to fight back, but she carried me out and slammed the door shut behind her. From that moment on, she'd never let me enter their bedroom again. In fact, I wasn't even allowed to walk past it unless it was to get outside. Whenever I went to my room, I had to tiptoe past their bed, and even then, I could never look up. I swear that if I glanced up at the walls, I would see something that would haunt me forever. To this day, I'm not exactly sure what my parents did in that room. Maybe they were trying to summon a demon, or maybe a demon had already possessed them. Well, it didn't matter because they'd never let me enter the room ever again. But one night, I decided that I had enough, and I was gone. Find out what was going on in there. I had been planning this for weeks, and I was ready. All that stood between me and my parents' bedroom was a door. Well, technically, it was also a deadbolt, but I had removed the pin and was ready to open it up. My heart started pounding, and I began to sweat. As I slowly pushed the door open, I had expected it to be locked, but my plan had worked. And as I snuck inside, I made it my mission to find out what was really going on in there. The room was dark, but I could make out two figures standing over my bed. "Mom, Dad," I asked, "is that you?" They turned around and the look on their faces was pure terror. Their eyes were wide with fear and their mouths had formed into silent screams. I could see that their hands were covered in blood, and so was everything else in the room. The walls, the sheets, the furniture, the air itself seemed to be soaked in it. My parents looked at me for what felt like an eternity, and then they both ran to the closet and hid. I called out to them again, but this time they didn't answer. Instead, I heard a voice from within the closet. "Leave us alone." Was that my mom? what had happened to her. As I approached the closet, the voice continued, "Get away from us, please." I hesitated for a moment, but then I opened the door and stepped inside. It was pitch black, but as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw something that made me stumble backwards in shock. In front of me were my parents, but they weren't exactly themselves. They were covered in blood and flesh, and their eyes were glowing red. Their teeth were long and sharp like fangs, and their nails were curved and hooked. It was as if they had transformed into some kind of demonic creature. Before I could scream, one of them lunged at me and sank its claws into my shoulder. I cried out in pain and instinctively bit down on its arm. It hissed and pulled away, revealing flesh that was cold and slimy to the touch. Then it did something that made my blood run cold. It smiled, and I saw something that should not exist. Rows upon rows of teeth, sharp and pointed like icicles. This went on for what felt like an eternity. It attacked me, clawing and biting, until I thought I would pass out. But then suddenly, everything went black. I woke up to the sound of my own screams echoing in my ears. I was back in my bed, safe and sound, or so I thought. As I looked around the room, I noticed that something was different. The walls were bare, no longer adorned with the intricate wood paneling that had been there before. And as I got out of bed, I saw that the door to my parents' room was gone. The closet was sealed shut, and there was no sign of the creatures that had attacked me. I ran to the window and looked out into the forest, hoping to find some answers. But all I saw was the same creepy trees that had been there since I was a kid. Just then I heard footsteps coming up the stairs, and I froze. Was it them? Had they followed me here? I couldn't risk it, so I jumped out the window and ran as fast as I could. I didn't stop running until I reached the road, where I collapsed in a heap on the side of the dirt path. And that's when I saw it. My name spelled out in blood on the asphalt. And then I realized that they had followed me. They had tracked me down in the forest and left a message for me there, a warning. Whatever they were, they had found me, and they weren't going to stop until they got what they wanted. I don't know what that is, but I'm terrified to find out.